Drive Live talks education for the next 40 minutes, and we would welcome your thoughts as a parent or as a non-parent on 4001 or via the free app. We're going to be talking about the freeze-on fee hikes for private schools here in Dubai that was announced just before last weekend. Big news, of course. Very good news for parents. Education is expensive. Essentially, parents in Dubai welcome the decision to freeze school fee hikes. We've been looking at the various ramifications of fees. So here's what happened. No increase in school fees for Dubai private schools for the academic year 2018 to 2019, and the agreement was reached during a meeting of the Dubai Executive Council. The aim is to relieve the financial burden on parents, and it's a decision that has been implemented immediately, of course. Now, we have three guests with us today. Fiona Cottam is with us. She's the Chief Academic Officer, Principal at Heartland International School. Fiona, welcome back. Nice to see you.
Thank you very much.
To discuss that with her, Mark Steed is here as well from Jumeirah English Speaking School. Mark, nice to see you.
Nice to see you, Tim.
Very warm welcome back. And also David Wesley, the co-founder of Which School Advisor. David, nice to have you here.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Well, look, let's start with Backstage in the green room, which is actually not a green room, it's a red room. So you don't always get the chance to sit together and discuss. You're all busy people. Fiona, can I start with you? What was the chatter around the water cooler, as it were, backstage today?
I think we were sort of debating the impact that this decision will have on a number of schools in Dubai. Not necessarily even our own schools, but we were certainly sharing the impacts that it will have for us in terms of decisions and plans that we might have had for the future. But one of the key things that I'm happy to share is that we had already taken a decision at Heartland this year not to increase our school fees. But that meant that we had planned and budgeted for that accordingly. The second part of that, of course, is that we're a new school and we're only in year 3 of operation. It's going to be year 5 to 7 before we break even, which is quite the norm in new schools. So we're already running at a loss, as it were. Perhaps not in real terms, but certainly on paper in terms of how the whole project has been planned forward over those years. So had we taken a decision to increase fees, it could have had quite catastrophic impact for us as a new school. We've budgeted accordingly. It won't affect us perhaps as badly as it might some other schools, but it does take away the autonomy of making the decision.
There we are.
And it is a 12-month, it's an announcement that will last for 12 months, of course. There are fears after that, I suppose, of what will increases look like, and that's, again, on a parent's agenda, I suppose. But it also leaves me thinking, what does it mean for the schools, the newer schools, the schools that are less equipped to deal with this impact on their bottom line? So what we'll do is come back and discuss that in a few minutes' time. There is a lot to talk about today. I mean, I guess a lot of parents will be thinking to themselves, well, if some parents will be thinking to themselves, let me qualify that, Fiona, are thinking, well, if schools can't put the fees up, is there going to be an impact on the quality of the education that my children might receive? And in some cases, perhaps the answer is yes.
Well, I just want to, first of all, not challenge, but just change the answer from Mark there, because it's something that the for-profit schools also won't compromise on, and that is quality of education and standards. So I think that regardless of the challenges that we might face, each one of us is committed at all costs to make sure that we never compromise in terms of what we deliver to children and how we support our staff through their development and through their appointments as well.
Well, I mean, it is worth reiterating just quickly that schools are overseen by the KHDA, and those standards are whether you are not for profit, wherever you are. Yeah. And you're right to point that out.
Yeah, they're exactly the same standards that we adhere to, and they're the same standards that we all aspire to in terms of how we work with children and what we deliver. Will something have to give somewhere? For me at the moment, no, in my school, but it may happen with schools in terms of class sizes, for example. That might be somewhere that people will look. They may look, as Mark said, at their teacher experience and qualifications. They may have to change some of their models in terms of how they run their business plan. But lots are affected by the resources and the facilities that school have and their actual running costs as well. So sometimes you can't make wholesale changes, and what it will affect is not just just the profitability of schools, but actually just the overall running costs of schools and how schools manage from day to day.
On that front, I just want to come back to a text message that we received here, basically asking, is there any way to level the playing field, as it were, in what schools pay for lease or rent or the facilities, to make sure that they kind of all improve at the same level? Is that at all possible?
Well, I mean, you've got private owners of land from whom we either rent land or we buy land, we lease land, whatever the model might be within a school organisation. And it depends on the premise under which that school was built. It sometimes depends on where the school is and the actual location in the city. Certain areas will obviously be more affordable than others, but I think land cost is still at a premium in Dubai. And I'm not sure it's regulated from one source in terms of the cost, but I could be wrong on that. I just don't have that type of knowledge.
David, I just wanted to ask you about this one, whether you've heard any rumblings, because, of course, whilst most parents are going, this is fantastic news for them, unfortunately for other parents, they have slightly different years and term times. So they've already paid their fees for the coming academic years, namely the Indian schools. So have we heard anything on whether there's likely to be, what is likely to happen in that front? Are they likely to be refunded or have a discount the following year? How is that going to work? Or we just don't know at this point?
Well, we don't know anything. That's not been commented on, and I don't think there's any decision that's been made on that. So I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
You would figure there, I suppose, it would make sense for schools to readjust in some way. But again, I suppose without clarity, that's for the schools to do. So let me ask you this, Fiona. I'm going to ask you, where are you going to get the money to implement plans, or where are you going to have to cut back to implement plans that you had for 2018, for 2019? Is there anything that you can tell us, first of all, or give us a broad stroke approach, if you would?
Gosh, I love when you ask questions like that.
I don't mean to put you on the spot, but it's in my head.
You always do, though, don't
I know.
you? Look, as I said, we had made a decision and planned our budget at Heartland that we weren't increasing the school fees anyway. And we did that, I suppose, recognising that the market was maybe in a more challenging position.
Sure.
And I think, therefore, that the decision from the ruler's court in terms of freezing school fees as an incentive to try and boost the economy longer term will make sense. But we're going to have to go through a short amount of pain at the moment. So what I will certainly do is look at utilisation of staff, look at perhaps better utilisation of resources. But my orders have gone in for next year, so I can't renege on costs that have already been sort of attributed to different companies. There might be some special projects that I would have considered throughout the year that you might now pull back and say, well, that would be a nice to have, but it might not be something I'll do next year. And we'll have to sit as a team to have a look at where we can just tighten our belts as opposed to make cuts. And I would just hope that our children and our families won't notice where we make those cuts. So it could be in terms of, an additional conference, for example, that somebody might have liked to go on, and you try and look at a different way of addressing that professional development rather than them flying to Madrid for a conference. So I think there are certain ways we can tighten our belts that hopefully children and families will never notice and never see. And it's something for us as leaders in schools to manage with our owners or with our governing board. What you have to remember is that if new families aren't coming in, as what Mark talks about as the churn, what you're actually just getting is this constant movement between schools the whole time, which is actually unsettling for children as well. When you have children who maybe are on their third school in 5 years, that lack of consistency in terms of what they're learning and how they're achieving is driven actually by families' financial need to actually change school because of school fee structure. So there is a reason, behind holding on to fees and keeping them as low as we can. But at the same time, the other side of that is how we deal with the challenges.
Pleased we got onto that point, the churn, because it's very important. Not only is it a great phrase to bring into a conversation, but it is a very good point to make. If I can paraphrase what you said, Fiona, have to cut their cloth accordingly, and you then have to think, what is really important? Can we put this off for some time? But we are in tough economic times. Schools are under the microscope more than ever, I think it's fair to say. Annual inspections, teacher licensing is something that is being applied, of course. And every time you've been in this studio, we've talked about the inclusion agenda to a great extent. And all of those on top of a fee hike. There is more pressure, simply put, isn't there?
I think there is, and I think there's changing pressure on schools, and I think quite rightly so, I have to say. I mean, I've been in the country now 9 years, and certainly I would say the standard of education has changed and has improved considerably, in part driven by an inspection framework system. But at the same time, there are many outstanding schools in Dubai and very good and good schools in Dubai who collaborate and work very well together. We could probably collaborate even more, perhaps, which would reduce some of our costs in terms of how we look at teacher training, how we address the teacher licensing agenda, rather than having to go to an outside provider and pay them a considerable amount of money to train our teachers. Perhaps we could look at different ways that are more cost effective. And I'm sure that many of us would welcome discussions on how we might look at different approaches to things that we all believe are very important and will make a difference and drive standards and have an impact on teacher quality, but certainly would maybe address the issue of particularly Arabic and Islamic quality of teaching and outcomes by working better together across the piece.
Emma?
This is an interesting one. Not a parent, but I'm an employer of many parents. And as employers, we can't absorb the constant and multiple increases in costs people are suffering by raising salaries. We simply can't raise our fees or prices to fund those salary increases. And the cost of education is now so great, we're now actively recruiting a different demographic to come into the region, i.e. those that don't have the burden of education fees. They're basically saying single people or couples without children. Schools need to find ways to reduce their operating costs and help keep the demographic mixed or suffer a lack of customers.
Customers is an interesting word to use there, I suppose. Fiona, what would you say to that?
Well, I think it brings us right back to the very start of the discussion, which was the premise under which the rulers have made the decision to freeze school fees, and they've done that because they want the country to maintain and improve its viability, to bring in new business into the country and to bring in a new economic growth and surge into the economy. We empathise with that, and we understand that costs have risen, but then so have the costs of flights and oil prices, which impact hugely on me bringing in staff into the country. The changes in VAT, for example, the changes in everyday living costs. So I think that we're all complicit in our responsibilities to make sure that we contribute to the growth in the economy, and schools are just one part of it. But we were talking earlier, and we certainly feel that schools are often a litmus test of how strong an economy can be. And if we start to lose students, we start to lose experienced families who have been very committed for many, many years to this country. And therefore it's important for us too to retain them, to ensure our schools grow.
There's just so much more to hear.
Download our podcasts at DubaiEye1038.com.